He had been in the air for 11 hours, not in the middle seat of a regional carrier, not wedged between a snoring stranger and a window that wouldn't fully close, but stretched across a cream leather recliner at 43,000 feet, watching the Atlantic give way to the Carolina coast through a porthole the size of a dinner plate. The jet was a Bombardier Global 7500, $73 million when new. His, technically, through a holding company registered in Delaware that nobody at this airport had ever heard of. He had not told anyone he was coming home early. He never did. He preferred arriving to a world that had not rearranged itself for his benefit. His name was Callum Reed, 41 years old. He wore a gray Henley, dark jeans, and a pair of boots that had been resoled twice. He carried one bag, a worn canvas duffel that had been to 6 continents and looked like it. He had no assistant with him, no security, no entourage. The jet had a crew of 2 and a cabin attendant named Petra, who had worked for him for 4 years and knew that he preferred his coffee black, his cabin quiet, and his arrivals unannounced. He took the crew stairs down to the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson, cleared customs through the private terminal in under 8 minutes, and walked into the main concourse the way he always walked into rooms, quietly, without announcement, his eyes doing the work his expression never did. He saw her before she saw him. She was standing near the baggage carousel for the International Arrivals Hall, which was strange because she had not known he was coming. She was dressed in a way she did not dress for him, fitted blazer, heels, the kind of deliberate presentation that meant an audience she wanted to impress. Her hair was done. Her phone was in her hand. She was laughing at something the man beside her had just said. The man beside her was Ronan Ashworth. Callum recognized him the way you recognize a minor irritant, without surprise, without heat. Ronan Ashworth was the kind of man who wore his watch on the outside of his shirt cuff so the room could see it. He ran a real estate development firm called Ashworth Group that had been expanding aggressively for the past 3 years, gobbling up commercial properties in Atlanta, Charlotte, and Nashville, on the back of what the business press called visionary leverage. What the business press did not know, because it was not their job to trace holding company ownership across 4 layers of shell registration, was that Ashworth Group's 3 anchor properties, the ones that made the portfolio look like it was worth what Ronan told people it was worth, sat on land that Callum's fund had quietly acquired 18 months ago. Ronan Ashworth had been building his empire on ground that belonged to someone else. He did not know this. His confidence, as always, was the setup. Callum's wife, her name was Sable, and she had been his wife for 9 years, did not see him until he was perhaps 40 feet away. He watched the precise moment she did. It was in her eyes first, a flicker, something recalibrating. Then her jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Then she straightened, and the straightening was the tell, because it meant she had decided something before he arrived, and his arrival was a complication she was choosing to absorb rather than abandon. She said something to Ronan. Ronan glanced over. He did not know Callum well enough to recalibrate anything. He simply looked, assessed, and returned his attention to Sable with the easy dismissal of a man who has already decided that whoever is walking toward him is not a threat. Callum stopped walking when he was close enough to be heard without raising his voice. "Sable," he said. "Callum." She did not move toward him. "I didn't know you were coming back today." "I know," he said. There was a pause. The kind that arrives when everyone in a small cluster of people is waiting for someone else to define what kind of scene this is going to be. Ronan filled the pause the way men like him always filled pauses, with forward movement and an extended hand. "Ronan Ashworth," he said. "You must be Callum." "I must be," Callum said. He shook the hand. His grip was even, unhurried. "Sable's told me a lot about you," Ronan said, and there was something in the way he said it, a lightness, a comfort, that told Callum exactly how long this had been going on. Sable did not look at either of them. She was looking at the duffel on Callum's shoulder, and something was moving across her face that was not quite contempt, but was not far from it. He had seen that look before, across the last 2 years, arriving in smaller and smaller doses at first, and then more frequently, more openly. It was the look of a woman who had revised her expectations downward and was now insulted by the revision. "You flew commercial?" she asked. "I flew back," he said. "That bag," she said. "You've had that bag since before we were married." "It still works," he said. Something shifted in her expression. He had seen this before, too. The contempt arriving at its final destination, past the point of hiding it. She reached out, and for a moment he thought she was going to take the bag from him, to carry it, some reflex of 9 years reasserting itself. Instead, she took it by the strap, and in one smooth motion, with the practiced ease of someone who had been rehearsing this decision for longer than today, she walked 3 steps to the large waste bin beside the baggage carousel and dropped it in. The bag landed with a dull sound. She turned back to face him. Around them, the concourse continued its normal business, rolling suitcases, announcements over the PA, a child crying somewhere near the international exit. Nobody paused. Nobody intervened. The witness count, Callum noted distantly, was perhaps 30 people in immediate line of sight, including 2 airline employees and a TSA officer who had looked up from his phone. "I had my attorney send the papers to your office this morning," Sable said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced this too. "You've been served." "I didn't want to do this here, but you made it here, so." Ronan had the grace to look at his shoes for exactly 2 seconds before he recovered his posture. Callum looked at the trash can. Then he looked at her. "All right," he said. That was all. He did not retrieve the bag. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Ronan Ashworth again. He simply turned and walked back through the concourse, past the baggage carousel, past the TSA officer who was still holding his phone, back through the corridor toward the private terminal where Petra was still waiting with his coffee. She watched him go with the expression of a woman who had expected more and was choosing to interpret the absence of more as evidence that she had made the right decision. She was wrong about that. Before we go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy powerful, emotional stories filled with betrayal, secrets, and unforgettable revenge, don't forget to subscribe to Plight Stories, because this story, it only gets crazier from here. He took the long way back to the private terminal. Not because he was lost. Callum Reed did not get lost in airports. He took the long way because he needed 4 minutes of moving forward in a straight line, with nothing required of him. No decision to make, no expression to manage. 4 minutes in which he could simply be a man walking through an airport with no bag and no wife and a trash can somewhere behind him that contained the last 9 years. He had built his first company at 26, a logistics software platform that he'd coded himself, largely, in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta with a second-hand monitor and a coffee maker that required patience. He had sold it at 29 for enough money that the number had felt fictional. He had taken that number and done what most people in his position did not do. He had not bought anything visible. He had not moved to a bigger apartment immediately. He had not purchased a car that announced itself. He had taken that number, divided it across 4 investment vehicles, and spent the next 8 years letting it grow in directions that were boring to describe at dinner parties and devastating in aggregate. He had met Sable 3 months after the sale closed. She had not known about the sale. That was important. She had met a man in a Henley at a gallery opening who had opinions about the work on the walls and a dry sense of humor and a quality of attention that she later told him she had never encountered in someone who wasn't performing it. He had not told her about the money for 4 months. By then, what they had felt real in the way that things felt real before money got into them and began slowly changing the atmospheric pressure of a relationship without anyone noticing until the headache had been there for years. She had taken it well at first, the revelation. She had laughed, actually, a real laugh, surprised. And he had loved her for that, for the laugh, for the fact that her first response was not recalibration, but genuine amusement at the shape of the situation. The recalibration came later, slowly, then less slowly. It arrived wearing reasonable clothes, comments about the car he still drove, about the neighborhood they lived in relative to where they could afford to live, about the friends she wanted to keep and the social circles those friends occupied, and the cost of entry into those circles that he was simply choosing not to pay. He understood what was happening. He understood it clearly and did not blame her for it entirely. She had grown up understanding money as status made visible. He had grown up understanding money as optionality made invisible. Those were not compatible philosophies, and the distance between them had widened across 9 years until it was no longer a philosophical disagreement, but a practical one. She had decided she wanted a life that looked like what she wanted, and Callum Reed was not willing to perform that life. Ronan Ashworth apparently was. Callum reached the private terminal, pushed through the door, and found Petra at the small reception desk with a fresh cup of coffee and the particular expression she wore when she had been watching his face and had already assessed that something had happened. "Ready when you are," she said. She did not ask. "Give me a few minutes," he said. He sat in a chair near the window that looked out over the tarmac. He could see the jet from here, his jet, the one he'd taken delivery of 14 months ago, the one registered to a holding company that appeared nowhere near his name in any public filing. He thought about the bag in the trash can. He thought about the canvas, worn thin at the straps. He had bought that bag at a military surplus store in 2007 for $38. It had been with him to Singapore, to Lagos, to Oslo, to a conference room in Zurich where a deal had closed that no one in Atlanta knew about. He thought about Ronan Ashworth's watch sitting outside his shirt cuff. He thought about the 3 properties, the Meridian Tower on Peachtree, which Ashworth Group had spent 4 years developing and which now anchored their entire commercial portfolio, the Lorne Building in Charlotte, the Westfield Complex in Nashville. All 3 sitting on land held by a Delaware-registered entity called Cerulean Land Holdings, which was one of 7 subsidiaries of a Cayman-registered fund called Halcyon Capital Partners, which was managed by a board of 3 that included, as its silent majority member, Callum Reed. He had not acquired those properties to use against Ronan Ashworth. He had acquired them because they were undervalued and the acquisition thesis was sound. He had acquired them 18 months ago, before he had any particular reason to care about Ronan Ashworth's name. The fact that Ronan Ashworth had built his empire on top of them was information Callum had possessed for approximately 6 months, roughly the time it had taken his property analyst to flag the overlap during a routine portfolio review. He had noted it, filed it, said nothing. He had not known 6 months ago that noting it would matter for reasons beyond the financial. He pulled out his phone. He opened a contact simply labeled RC and typed 4 words. Begin the Meridian Review. He sent it. Then he sat with his coffee and watched a ground crew push a 737 back from its gate with the slow, hydraulic patience of men who understood that large things required unhurried force. Ronan Ashworth had not always been the kind of man who wore his watch outside his shirt cuff. He had grown up in Marietta, in a house with a carport and a father who sold insurance and a mother who managed the books for a dry cleaning chain. Not poor. Not rich. Comfortable in the way that produced men who spent the rest of their lives trying to escape comfortable. He had gone to Georgia State on a partial scholarship, studied finance, graduated into the 2008 crash, and spent 3 years selling commercial real estate at a firm that was shedding clients like bark. He had been very good at the selling. Not because he understood real estate especially well in those early years, but because he understood the specific psychology of men who needed to believe they were still making moves during a period when the entire category of moves had contracted. He had started Ashworth Group with a partner at 31, bought the partner out at 34, and spent the next 7 years doing what the business press called visionary leverage. What it actually was, and what Ronan understood clearly, even if he preferred the other framing, was borrowed confidence. He was very good at making money that existed mostly on paper appear to be money that existed in buildings. The buildings were real. The underlying economics of the buildings were real. The ownership structure, the actual legally traceable ownership of the land beneath the buildings, was something Ronan had never felt the need to examine too carefully, because it had never mattered. It was beginning to matter. He did not know this yet. He was standing in the International Arrivals Hall of Hartsfield-Jackson, watching Sable watch her husband walk away, and what he felt primarily was relief. The specific relief of a man who had expected a confrontation and received instead a departure. He had met Callum Reed now. He had shaken the man's hand. He had looked him in the eye and found there an absence of the thing he'd been braced for: heat, emotion, the ragged edge of a man whose world was collapsing. What he had found instead was nothing, an evenness. A quality of stillness that he had cataloged, filed, and chosen to interpret as weakness. "You all right?" he asked Sable. "Fine," she said. She was watching the corridor where Callum had disappeared. Her expression was difficult to read. He didn't even fight for the bad. "Is that what you wanted?" Ronan asked. "A fight?" "I wanted something," she said. And then she stopped, because she wasn't sure what she had wanted, and the not knowing sat uncomfortably with the fact of what she had done, and she had not permitted herself to be uncomfortable with this decision for several weeks, and was not planning to start now. "Come on," Ronan said. He put his hand on her back. "Car's waiting." She let herself be guided forward. Behind them, 3 concourse workers had begun their end-of-shift sweep of the baggage area. One of them pulled a worn canvas duffel from the large waste bin beside Carousel 7. Standard protocol. Unclaimed items pulled, tagged, sent to lost and found. The worker checked the exterior pockets, found a phone charger, an international adapter, a passport. The passport was American. The name on it was Callum Reed. The worker tagged the bag and placed it on the lost property shelf behind the carousel desk. The Meridian Tower Review, when it arrived on the desk of Ashworth Group's legal counsel, did not look alarming at first. These things rarely did. It arrived on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the airport, in the form of a certified letter from a firm called Cerulean Land Holdings, LLC, requesting confirmation of the terms of the ground lease agreement for the Meridian Tower development site, located at the corner of Peachtree Street and 17th, Atlanta. The letter was courteous. It was specific. It requested, within 30 business days, documentation confirming that Ashworth Group had complied with Section 12B of the ground lease, a clause that specified permitted use categories for the developed property. Ashworth Group's legal counsel, a careful woman named Adeze Okafor, who had been with the firm for 5 years, read the letter twice and then pulled the ground lease from the filing system. She read Section 12B. She read it again. Then she called the partner at the firm that had handled the original lease negotiations 6 years ago and asked a very precise question. The answer she received was not the answer she had hoped for. Section 12B specified that the ground lease was valid for commercial office use, hotel development, or mixed-use residential under a set of density parameters that had been standard in 2018, but had since become restrictive relative to what Ashworth Group had actually built on the site. The Meridian Tower, as developed, exceeded the permitted density by approximately 14%. This had not mattered while the ground leaseholder was a passive entity that had never raised the issue. The ground leaseholder was apparently no longer passive. Adeze Okafor sent a memo to Ronan Ashworth marked urgent. Ronan read the memo on a Friday afternoon and made 3 phone calls. The first was to the partner at the real estate law firm. The second was to his CFO. The third was to a contact at a commercial title insurance company. All 3 conversations ended with variations of the same information. If the ground leaseholder chose to exercise the remedies available under Section 12B, Ashworth Group's position on the Meridian Tower was considerably more complicated than the balance sheet suggested. He did not call his attorney to ask who exactly owned Cerulean Land Holdings. He should have. Callum spent the 3 weeks after the airport doing what he always did when something large and irreversible had happened. He worked. Not as a distraction, not as avoidance. He worked because work was the place where the quality of his attention produced clean, traceable results, and he found that clarifying after the chaos of personal life, which produced results that were neither clean nor traceable, and frequently arrived years after the decisions that caused them. He had moved into the residence connected to his office, a converted industrial building in West Midtown that functioned simultaneously as a workspace, a home, and a place that looked, from the outside, like neither. The building was on a street of similar conversions, quietly expensive in the way that required knowing what to look for. He had bought it 7 years ago. He drove the same car he had driven for 4 years, a gray Volvo with 80,000 miles on it. He parked it in the same spot every morning. His days were organized. He woke early, ran 3 miles in the neighborhood, ate the same breakfast, and was at his desk by 7. His portfolio required a level of attention that most people would have delegated across a staff of 30. He preferred a staff of 4, his analyst, his legal advisor, his operations manager, and Petra, who managed everything else. The 4 of them knew roughly what he had. None of them knew all of it. His attorney, a man named Bertrand Cole, who had been his attorney since the first company, and who possessed the specific quality of being interested in the work without being interested in being seen doing the work, had confirmed the service of the divorce papers. Callum had reviewed them. They were aggressive in the way that suggested Sable had been planning them for longer than he had suspected, and that the attorney she had retained was the kind of attorney you retained when you expected a significant fight. Callum had noted this, the way he noted things, and had asked Bertrand to begin the response process without urgency and without escalation. "She's claiming an interest in the operating companies," Bertrand said, on a call that was businesslike and brief. "Which operating companies?" Callum asked. "The ones that are findable," Bertrand said. There was a pause. "She doesn't appear to have gotten to the others yet." "All right," Callum said. "Her attorney is good," Bertrand said. "I know," Callum said. "Tell him I said so." He ended the call. He was not worried about the divorce proceedings, not because he was planning to be difficult. He was not. He was planning to be generous in ways that he was also planning to ensure were clearly and thoroughly documented, so that the generosity could not later be characterized as obligation. He had already instructed Bertrand to prepare a settlement offer that would give Sable a meaningful financial outcome and no access to the structural holdings. She would not find those in time. Her attorney, good as he apparently was operating in a visible layer of Callum's financial life. That was not the whole picture. The whole picture was not visible. It had never been visible. This had been his choice, not a strategic one at first, but a personal one. He had grown up watching his father's moderate success become the organizing principle of every family relationship, the thing around which every conversation orbited, the weather system that determined everyone's emotional temperature. He had decided early that he would never let what he had become what he was. That distinction required, in practice, a significant level of concealment. He concealed not out of deception, but out of a deep, almost stubborn commitment to being known for something other than the number. Sable had known the visible number. She had not known the whole number. He was not sure, sitting in his office on a quiet Tuesday morning with his coffee and his analyst's overnight report, whether he should have told her, whether the concealment, however principled its origins, had been a form of withholding that she had been right to resent. He sat with that for a while. Then he opened the Meridian Review file and got back to work. The Lorne Building letter arrived 2 weeks after the Meridian letter. Then the Westfield letter arrived 4 days after that. All 3 letters came from different cerulean subsidiaries, technically separate entities, technically separate correspondences, technically separate legal matters. In practice, they formed a triangle around Ashworth Group's 3 most valuable assets, and Ronan Ashworth's attorney had now traced enough of the corporate structure to understand that the triangle was not coincidental. The cerulean entities all trace back to a Cayman fund called Halcyon Capital Partners, his attorney told him, in a meeting that had begun at 9 in the morning and was still going at noon. Halcyon is managed by a 3-person board. 2 of them are registered nominees, standard offshore structure. The third is a silent majority member. "Who is it?" Ronan asked. His attorney set down his pen. He had the specific body language of a man about to deliver information that the recipient is not going to want. "The name on the majority membership agreement is a Delaware LLC called Gray Resolve Holdings," the attorney said. "Gray Resolve is wholly owned by an individual." "Who?" Ronan said. It was not a question this time. "Callum Reed," the attorney said. The room was quiet for a moment. Ronan Ashworth sat very still. This was not his natural state. His natural state was movement, forward energy, the kinetic confidence of a man who had never needed to sit with difficult information because he had always been able to move past it. He sat with it now. He turned it over. He looked at it from multiple angles and found that it did not improve with examination. "He owns the land under all 3 buildings," Ronan said. "He owns the land under all 3 buildings," his attorney confirmed. "And the ground lease violations?" Ronan said. "Is he right about them?" A pause. "He's right about the meridian density calculation," the attorney said. "The Lorne and Westfield situations are more complex, but yes. On the meridian matter, he has a technically defensible position to exercise remedies." "What remedies?" Ronan said. His attorney placed a hand on the document in front of him. "In an extreme scenario, and I want to be clear that we have room to negotiate before that scenario becomes relevant, the remedies available include lease termination with a redemption window of 60 days. Ronan looked at him. "If the lease terminates on the Meridian Tower, your lender's security interest in the development becomes significantly complicated," the attorney said, carefully. "The building itself is yours. The land it sits on would revert. The practical effect? The practical effect is the bank calls the loan," Ronan said. His attorney did not contradict him. Ronan stood up. He walked to the window of his conference room, which looked out over a view of Midtown Atlanta that included, if you knew where to look, the upper floors of the Meridian Tower 7 blocks away. He thought about Callum Reed walking through the airport, the Henley, the old boots, the bag on his shoulder that his wife had thrown in the trash. He thought, he knew. The question was, how long had he known? The answer to that question, if Ronan had been able to obtain it, would have been 18 months. Callum had known for 18 months and had done nothing with the knowledge until the morning of the airport when he had sent 4 words to a man named Raymond Cole, who managed Cerulean Land Holdings, and those 4 words had set in motion a review process that was entirely legal, entirely methodical, and had been designed to be neither rushed nor delayed, but precisely timed. Ronan did not have that answer yet. He picked up his phone and called Sable. She answered on the second ring. "We have a problem," he said. "What kind of problem?" she asked. She was at a lunch, he could tell from the background sound. She had a lunch most days now, the social calendar of a woman who was performing a new life and finding, so far, that it had the texture she had imagined. "The kind that involves your ex-husband," Ronan said. A pause. "What did he do?" "He owns the ground under the Meridian Tower," Ronan said, "and the Lorne. And the Westfield." The background restaurant noise continued. She said nothing for a moment. "That's not possible," she said. "Callum doesn't—" She stopped. "He doesn't do real estate." "He doesn't do visible real estate," Ronan said. "He apparently does other kinds." Another pause, longer this time. He could hear her recalibrating, could hear the specific silence of someone running a retrospective on a set of assumptions and finding them compromised. "How bad is it?" she said. "Bad enough that I need to understand what you know about his holdings," Ronan said. "His actual holdings, not the ones the divorce filing found." "I don't know his actual holdings," she said, and her voice had a quality in it that he had not heard before. Something flat, something arriving at a destination she had not planned to visit. "I thought I did. I thought I knew about the fund, the early fund, and the operating companies, the things that were findable." "There are apparently things that are not findable," Ronan said. "Apparently," she said. He waited. She said nothing else. He ended the call. She sat in the restaurant for a moment after the call ended, her phone on the table, her food largely untouched. Around her, the lunch continued. Pleasant voices, the sound of flatware on ceramic, someone laughing at a nearby table about something that sounded expensive and trivial. She thought about Callum in the airport. She thought about the bag in the trash. She thought about the expression on his face when he had looked at her, the expression that was not what she had expected, not grief or rage or the specific wounded performance of a man who has been publicly humiliated. She thought about what the expression had actually been. She thought, he already knew it didn't matter. She picked up her fork and put it back down. The wedding was Ronan's idea. This was important. The wedding was entirely his idea, announced 6 weeks after the airport on his personal social media accounts, which had a following of approximately 80,000 people, a mix of Atlanta business community, real estate industry contacts, and the aspirational audience that had accumulated around his public brand. He announced it with a photograph of himself and Sable taken at a rooftop restaurant, with a caption about new chapters and the woman who made everything worth building. The response was substantial. Comments, congratulations, reposts. The Atlanta business press picked it up, a small item in the real estate section, the kind of cheerful social note that these publications ran to fill space between the deal announcements. Ronan liked the item. He liked the photograph. He liked the 48 hours of digital momentum that the announcement generated. What he did not like, and would not know until considerably later, was that the announcement had been seen by Raymond Cole, who managed Cerulean Land Holdings, who sent a brief message to Callum Reed noting the public announcement and asking if the timeline of the lease review should be adjusted accordingly. Callum replied, "No adjustment. Proceed on schedule." The wedding was set for 8 weeks from the announcement date. A venue in Buckhead, a historic property that Ronan had selected because it was the kind of place that photographed well, and because the guest list he had assembled required a room that communicated a specific level of arrival. 240 guests, the Atlanta business community, real estate contacts, some local politicians who had attended his fundraisers, a few minor media figures whose presence would generate the right kind of coverage. He had wanted witnesses to his new beginning. He had built the guest list accordingly. He was getting his witnesses. Callum spent those 8 weeks finishing the divorce settlement. Bertrand had drafted an offer. Callum had reviewed it, modified 2 provisions, and approved it. The offer gave Sable the house, their house in Buckhead, which was worth considerably more than she probably knew, because Callum had purchased the property adjacent to it 4 years ago through a holding company and had quietly improved the combined parcel's value without ever discussing it. She would receive the house, a cash settlement, and a monthly amount that his attorney characterized as generous and that Callum characterized as appropriate. She received the offer on a Monday. Her attorney called Bertrand on Wednesday. The negotiations lasted 11 days. They were not contentious in the way that Sable's attorney had apparently been preparing for. There was no scorched earth discovery process, no aggressive deposition strategy, no attempt on Callum's side to minimize or conceal the visible assets. He gave what he was prepared to give, clearly and without theater. And when her attorney pushed on the question of the operating companies and the fund structures, Bertrand responded with a set of documents that were thorough, accurate, and precisely bounded. The documents did not include Halcyon Capital Partners. They did not include Cerulean Land Holdings. They did not include Gray Resolve Holdings. They did not include 17 other entities that were equally invisible and equally real. Her attorney, operating in good faith with the documents he had, concluded that he had achieved a reasonable outcome and recommended the settlement to his client. She signed it on a Thursday, 4 days before Ronan's wedding. Callum was in his office when Bertrand called to confirm the signature. He said thank you, ended the call, and sat for a moment in the particular quiet of something large being finished. Then he opened his email, read the morning portfolio report, and got back to work. The Saturday of the wedding was warm for October, with a sky the particular shade of blue that made outdoor photography look effortless. 240 guests arrived at the Buckhead venue in cars that communicated the expected range of wealth, the majority leaning toward the upper end because Ronan had curated accordingly. The venue was exceptional. The flowers were exceptional. The catering company was the kind that required a booking 6 months in advance and a deposit that most venues charged as the full fee. Ronan had not skimped. This was the point. This was the demonstration. He stood at the front of the ceremony space in a suit that had been made for him in London, talking to his best man and his CFO and a city council member whose name appeared in the business section regularly. He was relaxed. He had not received any new correspondence from the Cerulean entities in 11 days, and his attorney had drafted a response letter that proposed a negotiated remedy for the Meridian density issue, a buyout of the ground lease, essentially, at a price that was high but manageable. He was waiting on a response. He expected the response within the week. He did not know that the response had already been sent. He did not know because his attorney had not yet checked the certified mail that had arrived at the firm's office at 9:15 that morning, a Saturday, the firm unmanned, the mail sitting in the physical inbox at the reception desk, that the response to the proposed buyout was a 7-page letter from Bertrand Cole, LLP, representing Halcyon Capital Partners, declining the proposed buyout, exercising the remedies available under Section 12B of the Meridian ground lease, and providing formal notice of the 60-day redemption window. He did not know that at 9:47 that morning, the lead officer at First Southern Commercial Bank, Ashworth Group's primary lender, had received a copy of that same letter, forwarded by a Halcyon Capital Partners representative, as required by the notification provisions of the loan covenant. He did not know that the loan officer, after reading the letter and forwarding it to the bank's legal team, had placed a call to the Ashworth Group CFO, a call that went to voicemail because the CFO was also at the wedding. He did not know any of this. He knew the flowers were exceptional and the sky was the right shade of blue. The ceremony started 20 minutes late, which was the groom's prerogative at his own event. Sable walked down the aisle in something white and deliberate, and the assembled 240 witnesses made the sounds that witnesses were expected to make. She looked, objectively, extraordinary. She had a gift for presentation, always had. Callum had admired it when they were together, the way she could compose a version of herself for a room that was both entirely strategic and entirely convincing. She had deployed it fully here. She reached the front. She stood beside Ronan. The officiant, a man Ronan had found through a recommendation from a client, a minister who did a lot of these events, and had the smooth, professional warmth of someone who understood that the couple before him were not there for theology, but for ceremony, began. 11 minutes into the ceremony, the CFO's phone buzzed. He had put it on silent, but not off, because he was the kind of CFO who never turned his phone entirely off. He glanced at the screen. The bank's loan officer's number. He declined the call. The phone buzzed again 30 seconds later. He declined again. 30 seconds after that, a text arrived. He read the text. His face did what faces do when the information arriving is of a category that requires immediate processing, regardless of context. He leaned to the man beside him, Ashworth Group's head of finance, and said something very quietly. The head of finance took out his own phone, read something, and went slightly still, in the way that people go still when the stillness is not a choice. Ronan was saying his vows. His CFO was now texting with 3 people simultaneously. His head of finance had stepped to the aisle and was moving toward the exit with the specific urgency of a man who has decided that the ceremony happening in this room is no longer the most important event occurring in his life. Ronan did not notice. He was looking at Sable, saying the words the officiant had given him, meaning them in the way he meant most things, genuinely, but with a portion of his attention always allocated to how the moment looked from the outside. The moment looked, from the outside, like a wedding. What it was, simultaneously, was the beginning of the end of Ashworth Group. The CFO's third text exchange was with the bank's loan officer, who confirmed what the letter had said. The exercise of remedies on the Meridian ground lease triggered a covenant review on the outstanding loan balance of $340 million. The review was automatic and mandatory. Given the letter's contents, the bank's legal team was recommending a margin call notice be prepared. The loan officer wanted the CFO to know before the notice was formally issued on Monday morning. The CFO typed, "How much time do we have?" The loan officer typed, "Notice goes out Monday 9 a.m. You have until close of business Friday to cure." The CFO did the math. The cure amount, the amount required to satisfy the covenant and prevent the loan from being called, was north of what Ashworth Group's liquid reserves could cover, by a distance that was not small. He stood up from his seat during the exchange of rings and moved quietly to the exit. Ronan slid a ring onto Sable's finger. The 240 witnesses applauded. The reception began at 6. By 7, Ronan's CFO had reached him in the corridor outside the ballroom, the specific reach of a man who needs to speak to his employer right now and is willing to physically intercept a bridegroom to do it. Ronan listened for 4 minutes with the particular stillness of a man receiving information he has not prepared himself to receive. Then he excused himself and made 3 phone calls from a coat closet adjacent to the venue's service corridor. The first was to his attorney. The attorney confirmed the letter's contents. The second was to the bank. The loan officer confirmed the Monday timeline. The third call he made without entirely deciding to make it. He dialed a number he had not used before, a number obtained through a contact who knew how to reach private offices of private people. It rang 4 times. Then, read. 1 word. Even. Unhurried. Ronan stood in the coat closet in his London suit with his phone pressed to his ear, and he said, "This is Ronan Ashworth." "I know," Callum said. "I'd like to discuss the Meridian letter," Ronan said. "My attorney handles the Meridian matter," Callum said. "You have his number." "I'm not calling about the legal matter," Ronan said, and his voice had something in it now that it had not had at the airport, a quality of stripped-down honest that arrived when the performance cost too much to maintain. Not by much, but by enough. Sable had moved into the house that the settlement had given her, Callum's house, which turned out to be worth considerably more than she had understood during the settlement, because of the adjacent parcel and because of Callum's 7 years of quiet improvement to the combined property. She had learned this afterward, the way she had learned most things about Callum's actual financial picture, afterward and incompletely, and with the frustrating sense that the complete picture was not one she was ever going to have access to. The social calendar that had organized her transition, the lunches, the events, the rooms full of people who were attached to proximity to Ronan, had thinned. Not vanished. Thinned, in the way that these calendars thin when the proximity is slightly less valuable than it was 6 months ago. She was not without resources. She was not without options. She was simply living in the ordinary aftermath of a catastrophic miscalculation, without the theater of villains or victims, without anyone to blame in a clean, satisfying way. She thought about Callum sometimes, not with regret. She was not ready for that characterization, if it was even the right one, with something more like accuracy. She thought about the version of him she had made in her mind, the man who drove the old car and wore the old boots and carried the bag with the worn straps, and was, at some level, a disappointment in the currency she had decided mattered. She thought about the distance between that version and the actual man, and she found that the distance was not something she could measure cleanly, because she still wasn't sure how large it was. The bag, she had been told, had been retrieved from the airport lost and found by a Callum's office assistant. The assistant had sent a car. The bag had been returned to the converted building in West Midtown, where Callum was already back at his desk. His passport had been in the exterior pocket. It had been re-stamped twice since the airport. Callum was at his daughter's school play on a Thursday evening in November, a production of something musical that involved a large number of 9-year-olds and a set that was ambiguous but enthusiastic. He sat in the third row. He wore a dark sweater and his old boots. He had driven himself in the gray Volvo, which now had 94,000 miles on it and an oil change due. His daughter, her name was Nia. She was 9, she had his eyes and her mother's gift for performance, was in the second scene, playing a character that appeared to be a talking tree. She took the role with full commitment. He watched her with the quality of attention he brought to everything, complete, undistracted, unhurried. The parent beside him, a man he vaguely recognized from pickup line interactions, leaned over during the intermission and said something about the kids being great. Callum agreed that the kids were great. They sat in companionable silence through the second half. After the play, he found Nia in the corridor outside the auditorium, where parents were collecting the children. She ran at him with the specific velocity of a 9-year-old who has been performing and is ready to come back to herself. He caught her. "Did you see me?" she said. "I saw everything," he said. "I forgot the second line in scene 2, she said. "I didn't notice," he said. She pulled back to look at his face, assessing the truth of this with the particular precision of a child who knows when adults are managing her. "You're not just saying that?" she said. "I'm not just saying that," he said. "You were entirely convincing as a tree." She decided this was acceptable. She took his hand, and they walked out to the parking lot, to the gray Volvo, and he drove them through the November dark to the building in West Midtown, where he made dinner in the kitchen that served as the ground floor of his home, and she told him about the second line she had forgotten, and the classmate who had laughed, and the teacher who had given her the part because she had the best memorization in the class. He listened to all of it. He drove the same car. He wore the same boots. He had the same quality of attention he had always brought to the things that mattered to him, and none of those things had changed because someone else's assessment of them had changed. He was simply undeniable. Here is the question that stays with you after the lights go off. He never raised his voice. He never made a single threat. He gave her the house. He settled fairly. He told Ronan to call the attorney and work out the paths forward.